Hello everybody, it's Professor Parish, and I hope you guys have been having a fantastic week too. You guys are settling into your classes, you're getting used to your schedule, and you are picking up on how we do things online in English 122. So, I know week two's video was very long, and I do apologize for that because I know it's a lot to have to sit and watch, but hopefully this week's week 3 video is going to be a little bit shorter but still have enough information to help you as we chug along through our discussion of fiction. So a few housekeeping things before we really get started with this video. First of all, as far as the discussion forums go, I am still grading them currently for week 2. You guys are doing awesome on your posts so far, and I'm hopefully going to have those graded by Monday night completed. If you're wondering what your grade is on the forum, here's how it breaks down. The discussion forums are each week that we have one worth 20 points. 10 points of that is the initial post that you do by Friday. Now if you post Saturday or Sunday, I'll still accept those posts, but I do dock 5 points off of your assignment because it's late and you're supposed to post by Friday. But that's 10 points. And then you're supposed to respond to at least 2 peers. Each of those peer responses are 5 points each. So 10 points designated to your peer responses and 10 points designated towards your initial post. Now, if you posted correctly without any grammar errors, you answered all the questions, and you did it on time, and you responded to 2 of your peers in a, decently detailed response with no grammar errors, you'll get 20 out of 20 points. If you've been noticing that your grade in the discussion forum so far is like a 19 or an 18, what that probably means is that somewhere in your posts, either your initial post or your post to your peers, there's probably either 1, a grammatical error, which I've counted off on, or 2, your posts are just a little too basic or a little too simple. And maybe you need to elaborate a little bit more in your responses to your peers. Because after all, these are taking the place of us talking in class. And I know that when we have face-to-face classes, sometimes it can be very scary to talk in front of a class or to speak up or, voice your opinions about something because of insecurities. Maybe you're afraid people will think that your opinion is odd or they won't agree with it. Whatever the reason is, the nice thing about our online forum is that you get to voice your opinions and there's not that fear of having to talk in front of a group. So feel free to post and be elaborate, always be respectful to your peers if you disagree with them, but feel free to, post your opinions and be detailed with it. And some of you are doing a fantastic job of doing that. So kudos to you guys. Way to go. The other thing I wanted to talk about housekeeping wise is how the Dropboxes work. I know I've had a few students email to ask how they function and what the whole deal with it is, because it is a little different than what you normally do when you upload attachments. So I am viewing our page like a normal student would. I've got it in that mode. So I'm going to go over to course content, and there we go. So what will happen is each week, once the week is over, there'll be a little check mark by it, and it'll show you that the week has ended. So currently we're still on week 2. So I'll go down here, and these are the 3 assignments that are due this week. So your paper 1 thesis, your reader response, and the week 2 discussion. Now the discussion, you click on and it'll take you to the discussion forum, which you can get to up here. But let's say I'm going to turn in my reader response. I will click on that link. It shows me when it's due. If I'm having any questions about the assignment, you can add a comment and I will see that and answer you back. And then you upload a file here. There will always be this blue box and it will show you to upload a file. So what I'm going to do is click that box. And see, it asks you to choose a file. So if I go to choose file, this box pops up. And this confuses some people. They're like, wait, what is this? This is not my computer. What this is it's called a Moxie Manager. And our online class will store every document you upload. So the nice thing is if you need to go back and look at an assignment again, like say you need to go back and look at paper number 1 after you turn it in, it will save on this box, which is very helpful. But what you need to do is first make sure that your assignment is saved either onto your phone or onto your computer. One of those two things. Second, once this box pops up, you're going to click the Upload button. This is what allows you to choose from your computer. This is normally what would pop up when you attach a file, like sending an email or doing something else. But there's just that extra step to get to this point. And so then I'll do, let's say this, I pick this reader response, I'll click Open, and what it does is it will upload it right here. And once it's done uploading, this insert will show up and you can click on it. So I click on it, now it shows the file right there, and then I can put a description if I want, or I can just click Add File. And voila! It shows that my link to my file is right there and right there. So that's how you do it. There's just one extra step than what you normally see when you upload a document, but I really like the Moxie Manager because it lets you save files. You can always go back and revisit them. It's a very nice tool to have that this online class features. So that is how the Dropboxes work. And if you guys have any questions, please don't hesitate to let me know. I am always happy to answer questions, and don't feel like you're bothering me or anything like that. I get so many emails where students are like, oh, I hate to bother you. No, you're not bothering me. It's my job to answer your questions. However, if you email me at like midnight or 1 a.m., I'm probably asleep and I probably will not answer them till the next day. Just FYI, I have had some students be like, why didn't you answer my message, my email to you? And I'm like, because it was 2 a.m. and I'm old and need sleep. So if you upload the wrong file on accident, you can always click this little trash can and it will let you delete it and re-upload a file. And that's another thing. I would make sure that you label your files very specifically. Like if your file is paper 1, final draft, label it like that. Don't just save it as document 47 or whatever it starts out as, because then you'll be searching through your computer at the last minute going, where is paper 1? What's document 47? Is it document 46? Is it 48? Ah! And you don't want to put yourself in a panic. Okay? So that is how the discussion forum works. Speaking of reader response, number 1, I hope you guys enjoyed Hemingway's story. I know some of you have probably read it already, and this was just revisiting that story, but I like this story probably as one of my favorite selections from our textbook for a short story because it does so many things that are out of the norm of what we typically think with a short story. Hemingway was definitely an iconic writer because this story was written in 1927 and it's still relevant almost 100 years later, which is saying quite a bit. But I like this story because it takes what we normally expect from a short story and kind of flips it on its head. We're going to talk about point of view and symbolism today, which is very fitting with Hemingway's story. And Hemingway, in Hills Like White Elephants, takes a very minimalist approach. When we talked in our last video about character and plot and setting, we talked about how those had to be such rich in detail in order for the story to be good. This is sort of an exception because, as many of you pointed out in your answers, Hemingway's dialogue is empty. There's not really any characters in the story. They're all flat. We don't even know the man's name. The setting is vague. We get the hint that they're going to Spain, that they're in Europe. We get little hints like their luggage has stickers on it. They've been traveling. They clearly partake in beverages at various bars throughout the train, and you can kind of get this tension from their relationship, but the dialogue is choppy, it's short, we don't learn a lot about them, it's just a little vignette into these two people's lives. It almost feels like I was telling you guys in the last video about eavesdropping on a conversation. That's really what it feels like we are eavesdropping on this conversation, and it's very vague and intentionally cold and heartless, and that was Hemingway's style. And we won't get the style today, but we will talk about it in the next week to come. But the story is just one of those rare examples where you can be extremely minimalist and still have an effective story that the audience can fill in the gaps for and that resonates, decades later. So I've really enjoyed your reading responses so far. Everyone so far has hit exactly what they were supposed to do for this assignment. So again, kudos to all you guys, and I look forward to reading the rest of the responses. And I'm glad that you enjoyed the story, or at least understood the content well enough to answer the questions. And that's another thing. I do try my best to answer all of the discussion forums and all of the posts. I at least read every post that comes through. Even if I don't respond to every single post, I will read them all. So please note that I am reading your stuff, even if I don't necessarily respond to it. So let's begin, shall we, now that we're done with that, with fiction, chapters 5 and 6. I'm going to apologize ahead of time because I have tried my best to find the PowerPoint that originally had all of the slides on it for chapters 5 and 6, and it's gone. The joys of not saving things. I am a product. I should practice what I preach here, but I did not save a version of the PowerPoint with all these slides. So I do apologize. We're going to have to add in some slides here and talk about a few things on the fly. So I hope you're ready for that. But chapter 5 starts on page 179, point of view. And I really think the picture they chose to represent this chapter is interesting. If you look on there, it is the wall that they chose, that's sort of the Vietnam Memorial. It's very interesting because it's how we view perspectives on things. It's an interesting concept. A lot of the pictures that start out these chapters are very intriguing because they're not something you would expect. When we get to poetry, we'll definitely talk about the chapter pictures they use, but they're interesting options that they pick. So, chapter 5, point of view, talks about mainly the idea of our narrator. And the narrator, as the book says, is the person or whom that views the events of the story. So most stories have a narrator. That narrator can be a character in the story, it can be an omnipotent force, it can be nature, it can be just nothing, but there usually is a voice that helps to tell about the events in the story, and that is the narrator. So there are various types of narrators, and it's important that we know these types of narrators, one, because they're going to be on our exam, of course, but two, because they are narrators that will pop up in fiction, in drama, in poetry. They pretty much pop up in any form of literature, but especially fiction. The first type of narrator is a limited narrator. A limited narrator it's on page 180, and it's where we share and see the events of the story alongside the narrator. So the best example I can think of this is The Hunger Games, because it's Katniss. Katniss, we experience the story in real time along with Katniss. We see the events unfold as she sees them unfold. She doesn't know any more than we know, except for how the world works in the story, and she kind of provides us with the exposition of how Pan Am works, how the district works, all that sort of thing. So that's a very limited narration. The exact opposite of that is on page 181, and that is the omniscient narrator, and that is the all-knowing narrator who already knows what has happened. So an omniscient narrator is, if you think about It's a Wonderful Life, that movie with Jimmy Stewart, the narrator of that is kind of an angel, I suppose. We're led to believe that it's an angel or a head angel, and they know everything that's happened in the story, and they sort of use Clarence, another angel, sort of as a limited narrator. So there's multiple narrators going on in that story, and it works very well for the film. So your story can have multiple types of narrators, but omniscient is usually in third-person stories where they already know what has happened, and we're just kind of learning about the story for the first time. Intruding narrator is the third type. And I really like intruding narrator. It is a narrator that knows the audience is present, breaks the fourth wall. I would say probably the most popular intruding narrator to date is Deadpool. If you've seen the movie Deadpool or you've read the comics, he is a constant voice of the story that knows exactly what type of story he's in, and he constantly breaks fourth wall to talk to the audience directly. And that's a very rare type of perspective we see in stories, but I think it's becoming more and more popular. And we'll talk about postmodernism and things like that, but it's becoming more popular because it's more popular now for types of fiction to critique themselves and understand what genre that they're in. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But that's an intruding narrator, a narrator that knows the audience is watching them. And then we have different types. We have third person objective. And this is a documentary style narration. So think of Morgan Freeman narrating March of the Penguins. That's third person objective. It is very factual and emotionless. It's just to the point. Think of a historical documentary. The voice is just telling you the facts and nothing more. That's third person objective. And to contrast that, we have first person autobiographical, which is very much a confession or diary format. So when you think of Bridget Jones's Diary or the show Sex and the City, that has a very first-person autobiographical tone because the person is telling exactly what's happening. I think Grey's Anatomy does first-person autobiographical. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it does. But it's just written, the show is kind of like you watch it like you're reading entries out of a diary. That's that type of narration. And confessional tone is one of our terms in there, and that just means the same thing. It's the author confessing to us, the audience, things that have happened. All right. So those are our types of narrators. The last one is reflector, which is a little more rare. And a reflector narration is the reactions of the narrator affect how we view the story. So it's kind of like a one-sided narration. A reflector narrator views history a certain way, and we as the audience end up viewing it the same way that they do. So if, let's say, a reflector narrator was in a story about World War II in Germany, we would see the story from that person's perspective, and their views of history would be from the same perspective as well. So it'd be something a little different than what we're used to. There's a lot of really good Japanese historical films, such as Grave of the Fireflies and Barefoot Gin, that talk about World War II from the Japanese perspective, and that's a very reflector narrator because it's not we experience history and the events of the story and their reactions through the narrator, not normally how we would view them, which Grave of the Fireflies is a very good film. It's very sad, but it's very good. All right, the next term that comes up in this chapter is irony. Oh, the irony. And it is on page 182. Irony is a very weird term, and I feel like a lot of people get it wrong because they often confuse it with coincidence. So put not coincidence, which is things or similar things happening unexpectedly. That's not irony. Our book seems to have trouble defining irony, to be honest, because they will give us this definition here, but then when we get to poetry, they'll give us a different form of irony, and then when they get to drama, they give us an even different form of irony. So I think our book has trouble deciding what definition it wants to go with as well. However, for our textbook, we're looking here at Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn on the middle of page 182, which is our example. And in this case, irony recognizes the human duplicity and uses what we think will happen and flips it on its head or in a different manner. So you think something's going to happen and then something totally different happens. That's what they're defining it as here. And I'm not fond of that definition, and it will change throughout this textbook. So if you're like, I don't know about that definition of irony, don't worry, it will change. But that's how our book defines it. Again, we go back to stream of consciousness and interior monologue. And they are both forms of narration. We talked about stream of consciousness in the last video, and then interior monologue kind of being like the characters talking to themselves and working out their way through a situation, narrating inside their own head. So that is our terms there. So we're going to skip over past this story here. And I talked about point of view and the types. I'm going to start a new slide for this. We talked about the types of perspective. And that's first person, second person, and third person. First person is from the character's point of view. So in that case, we will see words like me, and I, and we, and us, and they, and so on and so forth. It's very much like a diary or journal in terms of tense. And most importantly, it's always set in the present. Usually the present. If a character is recalling something that's happened in the past, that is a possibility, but usually if it's first person, it's going to be like an in the moment, here's what's happening sort of thing. Second person is all you, and it's written from your perspective, according to the author. And that's why it's uncomfortable, because it's someone else writing what you're doing, even though you're probably not doing it. So it's a very uncomfortable format, as I've talked in the past video, and it's not easy to write in because we're so used to either writing in our own first person or writing third person, like we're flies on the wall watching what's happening. Writing in second person is a very odd experience, and if you want to challenge yourself on this first paper and be experimental, you could try to write this in second person. It is not an easy task, though. I have had students write second person point of view papers, and they said it was very, very difficult. But you could go for it if you're feeling adventurous. Typically, it's set in the present or sometimes the past as well. Maybe even the future. I don't know, future is hard to write in because it's all speculative. You don't see a lot of future tense stories. And finally, third person is from a character's point of view. I put this on here. It could be multiple characters' points of views or even a narrator that's not a main character. So, for example, with multiple point of views, you could look at the series Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin. That is a third-person point of view story, even though it's from various people's points of views. Or you could look at stories like It's a Wonderful Life or Life of Pi or something like that, where it's a third-person perspective. But these use characters' names, they, them, and so on and so forth. And it's usually in the past perspective instead of the present. But could be in present tense as well. That's the nice thing about fiction. There's not really any ground rules. As long as you are consistent, you are good. And that's a big thing with point of view. You have to be consistent and not alter from one point of view to the other. And I will advise you on that with paper 1. If you're going to stick with a perspective, stick with it. Don't start out in first person writing like a journal and then suddenly switch to third person. It will be awkward and it will confuse you and the reader, and it's just something to avoid. So figure out this week what perspective you want to stay in and try to be consistent with that. All right? And if you are changing perspectives, if it's some kind of stylistic choice you make, and we'll talk about style next week, just make sure that your audience realizes that you're doing it. And there's certain things you can do, and we'll talk about them next week to differentiate that. But anyway, that's point of view. All right? Chapter 5 does have several stories where they talk about those perspectives. They give you different examples. Make sure that you look at those. And I will actually put up in week 3 this week an example story that you guys can look at. It'll just be something for fun. I'll give you guys an example of an analysis and an example of a creative writing piece, so you guys can read those and see what they look like. They're both good papers. So I'll put those in week 3 for you guys in our handouts section on our course homepage. All right, so now we go on to chapter 6, which is symbolism. I love it. And that starts on page 216. And I, of course, love they chose the Statue of Liberty as our symbolic image. So, symbols, as we talked in the slideshow last week, are images that have meaning beyond themselves. And symbolism is everywhere. It is in every facet of literature. Colors have symbolism. Names have symbolism. Shapes have symbolism. Moods, sounds, any sensory items can have some sort of symbolic element to them. Setting can have symbolism. Items or props can have symbolism. There's just so much you can do with symbolism. And the idea is that it helps to enrich the story, and it gives the readers kind of like little winks and nudges at how things connect together. So symbolisms it's a lot of fun with a story. Our textbook talks about the types of symbols. So I want to go over that. They first talk about symbols are a shared language. And I would use the example of a stoplight. As I said in last week's video, when you stop at a stoplight and it's red, you automatically know to stop. There are no words that tell you to stop. You just know because that color red symbolizes to stop. Like the color yellow symbolizes that there's caution, slow down. And the color green means go, you're good. All of these are a shared language symbol. Everyone in the United States, every driver knows what those 3 colors mean. It's a shared language symbol. That's what that means. Everyone in a culture understands its meaning. Then you have symbols that are the opposite, that have a personal meaning to the writer. And my example would be the show The Simpsons. And that is where the symbol has a meaning only known to the writer. And a lot of this is to help the writer connect more to their work, to enjoy it more. But The Simpsons, for example, the TV show, the writer Matt Groening was actually based every character name off streets in Springfield, Illinois. Surprise, surprise. So Homer Simpson is actually based off Homer Street in Springfield, Illinois. Marge, I think there's a Marjorie Street. Lisa, Bart. I don't think Bart is from a street, but there's Lisa Street. There's different places and characters that are named after. Flanders is another one. They're just named after symbolic streets and names that are in Springfield, and that was something that was personal to the writer. So it's something that doesn't really have any meaning outside of that. Doesn't really, I mean, Homer isn't relevant other than it's a street name in Springfield, but to the writer it's something extra that kind of connects to their background and that helps them enjoy the material more as they write it. So that's what that is for. If I turn the page into page 218, then we see literary symbols rich in association. And I'm going to use the example of the color red in Twilight. And what this means is symbols have multiple meanings or representations. So in Twilight, you know, whether you like it or don't like it, the color red pops up quite a bit, symbolizing love, symbolizing blood, symbolizing life, symbolizing death in certain contexts. So there's multiple meanings associated with that color, and that would be considered a symbol that is rich in association. You could also look at the idea of chess in Twilight, the idea of the apple. All of those things are not just things present in the cover that have symbolic meaning, but they tie into the characters in the story as well. So a lot of times you'll find stories that have symbols that have multiple meanings as you read the story, and the idea is that it makes it a more rich experience as you read it. And then symbols can be ambiguous, meaning we don't really know what they mean. And I will actually use from our story that we just read, the hills in hills like white elephants. Some of you have some really great answers as to what the hills symbolize, but I think the biggest point is that Hemingway doesn't come out and tell us because he wants it to be ambiguous. He wants us to have different reactions and multiple interpretations of what it means, and that's what kind of helps create a dialogue as we read the story and helps us to understand it better. So it's nice when sometimes authors make symbols ambiguous, because if everything was cut and dry and set in stone, we wouldn't have anything to talk about. We'd just be like, this is what it means, and that's that. But I think some of the biggest fan conversations come from symbols that we don't necessarily have a clear-cut meaning. We're just left to interpret it how we want. And sometimes we agree with one another about it, and sometimes we disagree. And I think that makes stories more rewarding in the end, because we can continue to talk about them. So symbols have a meaning that is not clear and cut dry, so to speak. And finally, symbols acquire their full meaning at the end of the story. And of course, I have to use Lord of the Rings as an example there. The whole idea of the ring, you don't really realize until the end of the story, when it comes full circle, what the whole symbolic element of the ring was, how it was representations of power, of darkness, of greed, of selfishness. It was basically everything evil combined into this one little band. And you really don't realize that from the start of the story. You have to experience the characters go through the motions with the ring and follow Frodo and see how it corrupts him and learn how it corrupted Smeagol to really understand the whole symbolism behind the ring. And at the end of the story, you finally understand fully what it represents. And that would be an example of that. So symbols are not apparent or fully explained until the climax of the story. So these are all types of symbols that we can see throughout the story. They're not necessarily specific versions, but they're just what those symbols do in a story. And you on your exam will be asked to define these types of symbols and give an example of one. So you might be thinking about that as you read various stories, as you go back over stories that you like yourself. You can kind of pick out symbols and those could be used as an example in your text. So, going back through the rest of this chapter, with symbolism, most of it is just example stories that we see. The chrysanthemums is a really good example. The yellow wallpaper you've probably read in your high school English class. It is in here, and if you've not read the yellow wallpaper, I highly recommend it. It is a great read. But that is pretty much it about symbols. I would honestly, if you want to look more into symbols, if you're trying to get in your story for paper 1 different types of symbolism, you might look at mythology, name meanings. I know that when I write and try to create stories and characters, I love to look at baby names and their meanings because it's fun. Also think about your setting and what it represents and symbolizes. You know, we talked about different types of setting in the last video. Those are very symbolic. The idea of a setting as a mirror and a desert and it being arid and dry, and that symbolizing the desperation of a character. That's all symbolic. So thinking about your setting, think about your characters. Does your character have a spunky personality? Well, maybe they need a name that reflects that. Or maybe they need a name that's the opposite of it to be funny. So if their name is like Ruth, then you may think like, oh, they're this type of character, but then they turn out to be like really upbeat and bubbly. I would not imagine a story an upbeat and bubbly character named Ruth. Just doesn't sound like that. Or maybe they have a character named like Sparkles, and she's the most gloomy, depressing character in the story. That would be kind of taking symbolism and flipping it on its head. So think of the characters, the setting, and of course props that are in the story. So maybe, for example, your story has a wizard in it, and the wizard has an old walking stick, and that represents kind of a crutch or something that they need to get by. And then at the end of the story, the wizard kind of becomes all powerful and loses the cane or the staff, and you're like, oh, well, that staff was symbolizing their frailty, and now that they're not frail, they don't need it anymore. Just things like that. There's lots of different things you can use in the story. Seasons, usually if a story is supposed to be in a dark, sad environment, it's usually winter or rainy, because we associate those with various moods. There's just a lot you can do with symbolism and point of view in a story. The key to all of this is to be thorough and consistent. Your audience will never be confused if you are consistent. And that is my 2 cents on that. So, like I said, the video this week was not going to be as long as the video last week. Next week we're going to go over theme and style, our last 2 elements that are in the fiction section. As always, if you guys have questions, just let me know. I am going to be making an MLA video, and I am going to be posting it in our announcement section. I've been going slow about making the MLA video because we aren't using MLA for paper 1. So I feel like it's not entirely necessary to go ahead and throw that out there. The presentation is still online. It is still there, so if you really have a deep desire to go ahead and view the MLA presentation, you can. I am going to be working on the video and posting it this week along with week 4's video. It's going to be on YouTube. So I'm going to be gone next weekend, so I'm going to try to get those videos up early. If you have not subscribed to me on YouTube, if you have a YouTube channel, or if you have a subscription to YouTube, you can subscribe to my channel for the semester, and then as soon as it's over, you can unsubscribe and get out of English World. So I hope that this presentation was helpful. It was a little bit on the fly. Next week's, I'm going to go ahead and type some slides up ahead of time and show you all, but I was just certain that I had the slideshow present here, but apparently not. So this is my impromptu slideshow for chapters 5 and 6. Next week I'll have a more detailed slideshow. We'll talk about MLA in another video, and as always, just email me, let me know, call me at the office, stop by the office. I'm happy to see everybody. So I hope you guys have a great week, and I'm looking forward to seeing your outlines for paper 1. If you're not sure how to do the outline, go back to the video from week 2 and check out towards the end. I go over the outline guidelines there. But have a great evening, guys, and I'll talk to you later.